Hey friends, as we gather back, it's a good hint, right? All right, friends, welcome back. I know I certainly enjoyed listening to the Faith Leaders panel a few minutes ago. We'll go back and listen to the podcast in a couple of days so I can hear it again with new ears. Again, we're also going YouTube Live, so if you want to share this with your friends who couldn't make it today, you can either invite them to download the podcast or go to YouTube. These first two panels will be in those two places. But we are glad that you are here today. I didn't mention today. We certainly are hosting this today and sponsoring this event, as well as the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. And I saw Rabbi Josh Bixler walking in the back. I just caught his attention. He is the president, is that right? The Faith Leaders Coalition of Greater Houston, and appreciate their support. If you want more information on that organization, you can see Rabbi Bixler in the back. But thank you all for sticking with us. This next panel is designed to help give you the information that you'll need when you go and make your congressional visits in August. Again, agenda-wise, after this panel, we'll take a break and then head downstairs for Advocacy 101 training and have meetings by congressional district. But we had a planning committee for this event, and they wanted us to talk about 4 topics: climate, immigration, disaster, and health. And so we'll spend this next chunk of time giving you some information on those. And with us for this panel, I'm going to say their name and then have them tell you who they're with, a sentence or two about that organization. We have Stephanie Thomas with Public Citizen. Oh, sorry. I'm used to reaching the other end first.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Thomas. I work with the nonprofit Public Citizen. We are a national public interest group, and we have offices in Washington, D.C. and Austin, Texas. I'm actually a satellite office from the Austin office. I'm based here in Houston. And in Texas, we specifically work on energy, environment, and ethics. So I'll be talking about climate change today.
And we have Carol Flores with the National VOAD, which I actually asked somebody about earlier to make sure I got it right. Volunteer organizations active in disaster. Is that right?
Yes, I work with National VOAD. We are a membership organization of 130 some organizations that do nonprofit humanitarian disaster response. Every major Christian mainline denomination, their disaster response arm is a member of our organization. Every state has a VOAD that is a member of our organization. And most other major faith communities have some representation along with them, some secular nonprofit organizations. And so we do not speak with one voice by any stretch of the imagination, but we are the place where we come to have conversations around the humanitarian nonprofit disaster response sector. And last but certainly not least, because she signed my paycheck, Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead.
I'm B. Moorhead. I am the Director of Texas Impact. And just because there are a few people, how many people are here who didn't know anything about Texas Impact before you came to this event? Just because there's a couple of people who didn't, Texas Impact advances mainstream values of freedom, justice, and opportunity for all people through grassroots advocacy and policy analysis.
All right, so we're going to start it out today because this topic touches so many of the other things that we're going to talk about. I'm going to pitch it first to Stephanie to talk about climate.
Thanks, Scott. Well, I think our faith panel really set up the conversation about climate really well. This is an incredibly urgent and important issue, and last fall we saw a number of reports released just highlighting how urgent climate is right now. The intensification of storms. Another study was released, I think just last week, talking about how Seattle is going to become more like San Francisco, Washington, D.C. going to become more like Nashville, except with some even more extreme weather. And we see these temperatures rising, sea levels rising, the intensity, increases in storms and other kind of extreme weather events, wildfires. So it can feel pretty scary at times. And yet, while all this is happening, some of our politicians fail to connect the dots between those events and the climate crisis. And when we think about some of the other impacts from the climate can impact immigration, it can impact food security. Connecting those dots are even a further stretch for a lot of politicians. So I think it's really important to keep this issue in the minds of our politicians, to keep connecting the dots for them, and to keep having conversations not just with them, but with our community members. Unfortunately, well, I'll go back a little bit further. When I was in third grade, I first learned about climate change, and that was before it was really a political issue, so people could talk about it. And then something happened in the 90s, the 2000s, where it became such a divisive issue that people weren't having conversations about it. That even kind of nudging into that could be a disaster, in terms of just talking to friends and family. So I think that is starting to change as more climate legislation is getting introduced. There's more conversations happening on the national level. There's the Paris Climate Agreement, and then the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement that our government is enacting. So there's a lot of more opportunities for discussion about climate, and I'd love to see each and every one of you walk away from this feeling empowered to talk a bit more about climate. I recognize many faces in the audience, so I know you're no stranger to climate change issues. I do want to talk about just a handful of bills that are currently at Congress. So the first one that I want to talk to you about is actually House Bill 9, HR 9. This is called the Climate Action Now Act. And this actually passed the House this spring. Basically, this bill is requiring the president to develop and update each year a plan for the U.S. to meet its nationally determined contribution under the Paris Climate Agreement. And so, as I said, this has already passed the House, but the likelihood of it passing the Senate, as the Senate stands right now, is a bit unlikely, I'll say. So I just want to put that out there, that it can sometimes feel like there's a bit of a stall in terms of what we really need to do and what's actually being done in terms of the climate crisis. There's a few other bills that I would really also like to encourage you to talk with your representatives about. One of them is called HR 763. This is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act of 2019. This is a bill that has been advocated for by a group called the Citizens Climate Lobby. Are any of you all part of that organization? Yeah, there's a handful of folks here. And this bill is unique in some ways because it is actually a bipartisan bill. So there's both Democratic and Republican support for it. And I really think this is an interesting tactic of the Citizens Climate Lobby because, as everyone in this audience knows, the climate crisis is not a partisan issue. It's an issue that affects every one of us. But unfortunately, I think the responses have largely been partisan. So this is a really good effort for both Democrats and Republicans to come together to support a market-based solution to climate change. I also want to mention that personally, I don't believe that this is the end-all be-all climate solution, that this is a really good first step, and there's a lot more that needs to happen in order to address the climate crisis, because some of what's being called for by scientists to really minimize the harm that the greenhouse gas emissions are doing to our planet, to people, to ecosystems, requires some pretty drastic action. And so the other bill that I want to talk to you about is the Green New Deal. And there is both a House bill by Andrea Ocasio-Cortez and a Senate bill as well. And the Green New Deal at this point is not, it's in the House and the Senate as a resolution. It is not a set of prescriptions at this point, and it's being developed, and the model at which it's being developed is pretty interesting. They're really driving for public participation in how it is developed, so that it can address different communities based on their needs. So, you know, what works for Houston in terms of addressing the climate crisis might be different than a place like Seattle or Washington, D.C. So it can help kind of tailor the policy proposals to communities, and I think that's a really interesting thing. And I want to make a note about the Green New Deal because it's not entirely a new idea. That I actually first heard of the Green New Deal maybe a decade ago as part of the Green Party initiatives, but what I think is really interesting is how it came about. There is a group called the Sunrise Movement, which is a group of youth. It's a youth-led movement. And last year, they were getting fed up with Congress not addressing the climate crisis. So they actually put a lot of pressure on the Democrats to do something about it. And that really helped catapult the Green New Deal into something that people across the country are talking about it. Whether good or bad, they're having a conversation about it. So I think that was a really important movement by the youth who are part of that organization. And I think it also touches upon how the youth are seeing the climate crisis as an incredibly serious issue. This is an all hands on deck moment. This is something that really impacts their future. You know, some people, young people are worried, will I be able to have kids? Will I have a livelihood? Well, what's going to be my role in 20, 30, 40, 50 years? So this is something that's really compelling them to move forward, and I think it's time for adults to step up as well and join.
Thank you. I saw many of you taking notes right there. If you sign in the back, we'll send some follow-up information with some of the notes from this panel. So you'll have those to help prepare for your congressional visits later. B, I know you have a bunch of notes in front of you, which are also on the back table.
Nothing but notes.
Nothing but notes. So over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've certainly been hearing heightened rhetoric around immigration issues, and Texas Impact is promoting a week of action in August. So if you want to say a few words about that, maybe what people should be thinking about as they head into that week of action on immigration.
Yeah, okay, wait, I have to look at this, okay. So yeah, and let me just say that I think of all of the issues that there are to talk about right now, immigration is one that is making people sort of immediately fly into kind of a gyroscopic frenzy, and that is not helpful to the policy process, and I am as likely to do it as anyone. So I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to stay very linear, and we can all talk about things that will really help right now. But before we do that, this is something that maybe will help right now. It helped me. I went this week. I had the chance to go to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Has anybody else been? It's a really interesting, quirky little museum. But there's an interesting, quirky little exhibit about the beginning of the public park movement in the United States. And as part of it, there was a quote by Frederick Douglass that I wonder if this will resonate with you the way that it resonated with me. Here's what he said. He said, "Poets, prophets, and reformers are all picture makers, And this ability is the secret of their power and of their achievements. They see what ought to be by the reflection of what is, and endeavor to remove the contradiction. In no other area of public policy could we be more needing to see the reflection of what ought to be, or see what ought to be by the reflection of what is, than in immigration policy in the United States right now. So hopefully all of you think of yourselves as poets, prophets, and reformers. The Catholic Church, which is kind of the spokesperson for the idea of immigration as a theological policy currently in a lot of venues, says three things about immigration. They say people have the right to migrate to sustain their lives and the lives of their families. The Catholic Church also says it is okay for countries to have borders and to enforce those borders. And it says, and when they do that, they have to show mercy. So all of us, in some way, sort of, I think, attached to that idea of, we understand there are borders, but we understand that people have to be able to migrate and we have to enforce those borders with mercy. You have three sets of papers that hopefully move from talking about poets, prophets, and reformers, and mercy to talking about public policy seamlessly. And they are these three. So the first one has Texas Impact's logo at the top. This piece of paper is how many people don't have all the pieces of paper? Because you thought you would get them later. A couple of people, some people won't admit it. That is okay, but know that this is what we're talking from right now. This is one pager. It says 3 keys to stabilizing the southern border. Erica, our courts and ports coordinator, and I met with a congressional office a while ago, and we talked about the fact that we were encouraging people to do visits during August. And we said, we're preparing people. We're going to give people information. We want them to come in and have productive conversations. And what they said was, oh, that would be so great if people would do that, because we just had 5 people come in this morning and yell at us. They didn't have anything productive to say. All they could do was feel feelings and yell about them. If you can go in to a congressional visit, or if you can write a letter, or if you can make a call, and you can be focused in the chaos that is the current policy milieu around immigration, it would be very, very helpful. 3 points, for some reason 3 is just our magic number. I guess sometimes it's theologically our magic number. 3 keys to stabilizing the southern border. 1, stop the criminalization of migration. There's a set of things that we didn't used to do that create a criminal system. So 1 is zero tolerance, where anyone who comes across the border is treated as a criminal. The second is the Migrant Protection Program, one of the most ironically named federal initiatives I can think of, which is the part about remaining in Mexico, and metering, which is the part that you've heard about where only a certain number of people can come across the bridges every day. Those 3 things are what are setting in place the criminalization of migration at the southern border. What any member of Congress is likely to say is, the reason that we're doing those things is because it's too expensive, because we don't have enough people to process all the migrants who are coming. We can't cut corners because you won't be happy about that either, they may say. So really, it's a money thing. Really what we're saying is, fund the system of due process that we have, which is when someone wants to make an asylum claim, they should be able to come make it, someone should process it, and they should be, if they are gonna be subject to deportation, they should get a real, trial with their own attorney and all of that stuff. Yeah, so it's going in and talking about how upset we are about the unfairness of the current system is much less helpful than saying, I understand it's a money thing, and I'm saying as a constituent, you have my permission to spend money that way. That's a better way to spend the money. The second thing is stopping the separation of families and detention of children. There again, everyone, if you ask any member of the Texas congressional delegation, children in inhumane conditions, they would say, no, of course they don't. No one supports that I'm aware of, and I mean really no one actively supports it. What they would say is, well, we're just doing the best we can with limited resources. We heard in a Texas level hearing last week, was it last week? It was last week, 2 weeks ago, that local governments and nonprofits are spending a lot of their own resources meeting humanitarian need that is generated by this underfunded system. So the second thing is also a money thing. It's also a money thing. It is fund local governments, fund the nonprofit community, including the faith community, to do the case management, the intake, and the community-based supervision, which includes ankle monitors, but has been working okay. Fund that and allow the communities to take on the people who are seeking asylum rather than warehousing them. So that's a money one too. So we got 2 out of 3 so far. Stop the criminalization of migration. Stop separating families and detaining children. The third one isn't necessarily a money thing. It's what we would say is a transparency thing. Make all aspects of the system transparent. That includes, making DHS, so Department of Homeland Security, reports available to the public, especially to the media, on a regular, predictable basis, so that we know that they're coming. And I think from the interfaith, the national interfaith community's perspective, maybe the absolute top of the list is let international and domestic human and civil rights observers into every single facility on their time, not as a dog and pony show. If any other country had a refugee or migration crisis, whether we thought they were handling it right or not, we would expect to send UN observers into facilities, into camps, to see what was going on. And we would expect that they would say, well, of course, we'd like you to come and make sure that we're doing everything in a humanitarian way. We are no different. This is now something that is happening in our borders, and we shouldn't just let it happen. We shouldn't just let observers come. We should be asking for them to come. So those are your 3 talking points to members of Congress. Now, there's a couple of additional things to say about that. So first of all, really what the faith community is asking for is a fundamental reframing here. This is not about foreign governments and bad people and drugs or any of those things. It's about 2 things. And what did I say they are? Money and transparency. Money and transparency. Who in the United States is in charge of money and transparency? Congress. Is it the judiciary? Is it the administration? But is it? It's Congress. So happily, Congress has the opportunity to step in and regain its footing with respect to this issue. This isn't magic. It's not even a huge leap of faith somehow. It's not affirming a new set of beliefs or something like that. It's just Congress's regular job that they do all the time. It's money and transparency. The second handout you have, so this first one, unless you wrote all over it, you can have another one if you did. This one's to leave. When you go to your congressional visit, this is for you to leave with them. It's what we call a leave behind. That's why. If you want to send a letter or an email or make a phone call, you can use this as part of that. This second one, am I on the time?
You're close.
Okay, all right.
I'm not gonna cut you off. Let's be real.
Well, and someone else will have to. Josh will. The second one is has a different logo on it. You will notice it's not Texas Impact's logo. It's the Interfaith Immigration Coalition. Who knows what that is? It is the coalition that all of the mainstream faith communities, Abrahamic and beyond, belong to in Washington, D.C. And this is their distilled and curated, but longer than our 3 points, explanation of their consensus positions with respect to the current crisis and a little bit beyond that. You can leave that too, and I bet that they would be really happy if you would, because a lot of members of Congress aren't completely clear who the Interfaith Immigration Coalition is, and we should all want them to be. Then there's a third piece, the National Immigration Forum. Who knows what that is? That's not a religious thing. It's a think tank. This piece of paper is not a leave behind. It's not a secret, but it's probably not helpful to you to leave it with your member of Congress. But it's helpful to you to know what's in it. This is about the HUMANE Act. How many people have heard the term the HUMANE Act? The HUMANE Act, HUMANE stands for this long thing, Humanitarian Upgrades to Manage and Assist Our Nation's Enforcement. It is a bicameral, bipartisan piece of legislation being promulgated by our Senator John Cornyn and Representative Henry Cuellar, who is from the Valley. If you talk to your local Democratic club or your local immigration task force or any of the groups that you may be talking to about this issue, they will say to oppose the HUMANE Act. The one last thing I want to say about this, because I know my time is up, is it will be much more helpful if instead of saying you oppose the HUMANE Act, at this stage of the game, that is a brand new thing. It is not in any imminent danger of becoming law, and it would probably go through a lot of changes before it would ever get to that point. Rather than going in and saying, I oppose the HUMANE Act, it would be tremendously helpful if instead you would say things about it that you think would be misguided. It would be very helpful if you would say, what I oppose about the HUMANE Act is the part that would remove important protections for children and families from indefinite detention. But there are other parts, and I'm not going to read it to you, and I know I don't have time to talk about it, but there are other parts of the HUMANE Act. You can certainly find at least one of the bullets about it that you can say, well, I can see why that would be really helpful if you could say, I see what the authors are trying to do, and I'm very appreciative of that. I just think there are things that need to get worked out. Those particular provisions are a non-starter for me. So, does that all, or, okay.
So these first three, climate, immigration, and disaster, are all very closely related. And Carol, as I introduce her, I'll say National VOAD, I don't think has policy prescriptions for you to go into the office with. But I wonder if you could talk some about the intersection of climate and immigration with disaster, maybe some of the things that we should be thinking about as we move forward.
Sure. So again, our member organizations their primary mission is humanitarian response. Most of those organizations, many of those organizations do that as an arm of the faith community that they represent. So you have the United Methodist Committee on Relief, you have Lutheran Disaster Response, Episcopal Relief and Development, and on and on. They are generally standalone organizations, but they're doing it as an expression of the faith community that they grew out of. Which means that while generally their work is focused on responding to floods and tornadoes and fires and hurricanes and all of the things that we think of when we think of disaster response, it means that they intersect with these other things as well. If you have spent time in the border, odds are you have seen expressions of these organizations active working in that humanitarian response. They tend not to get involved in the political aspects of that. Their core mission is to serve people. Their hands in what they're able to do around those things. We have our national conference meets every year in May, and the most popular keynote speaker at our conference this last year is a climate scientist. Scientology is also a member of our organization. A climate scientist. And I will be honest, we were a little nervous about how it would go over. Meteorologists are not necessarily, their primary skill is not necessarily public speaking, right? So how's that gonna go in a room of 700 people? And we are a diverse group of folks, right? Where is this gonna fall across our bandwidth? He was the most popular speaker we had over the course of our conference. He was very well received. And one of the things he said that really stood out to me is that we absolutely need to be paying attention to the kinds of things that will slow down the impact of climate change that my partner here mentioned. But what impacts us in the response world is that we also have to be realistic that we are going to have to adapt to the impacts that are already happening and will continue to happen that we can't stop in terms of climate change. And that impacts the response world, right? When there's a flood, it's a whole voluntary community that comes in and mucks and guts. You can talk to my friend Scott Moore in the back. He's got a big trailer and he'll hook you up with tools to clean out houses that have been flooded. And then they go into rebuilding. We have many organizations that will spend years that are still very active here in Texas rebuilding homes that were impacted by disaster. Several things are happening because of climate change. Bigger disasters happening more frequently means we're tapping that voluntary capacity and that resource. We're also tapping these organizations live on donated dollars. And there is donor fatigue is an incredibly real thing. People are worn out. And they are certainly worn out in flooding, in supporting disaster response in areas that have flooded 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times in the last decade. So while I'm not speaking on behalf of our organizations, I do know that the conversations are happening in a very real way amongst our member agencies around having to be much more strategic around where they spend their volunteer time, where they spend their donor dollars, how and if they will enter communities and rebuild them so that they're not rebuilding a home that's just going to flood again in 12 months. For me, what that means from an advocacy standpoint is really encouraging governments to get out in front of this and be thinking not only how to slow down climate change, but how to adapt to, again, the very real impacts that are already happening. What does it mean for building codes? What does it mean for where things will be rebuilt, where things will not? Unfortunately, sometimes those decisions after a major disaster take 2 to 3 years. We still haven't come up with all the new flooding mitigation stuff in Houston that we committed that we would do post-Harvey, and we're 2 years out. So the voluntary community is either going to rebuild homes that will quickly be out of code as soon as those things are decided, or people are sitting and waiting because organizations don't want to spend those very precious volunteer hours and donated dollars until they know that some decisions have been made around how those things are going to happen. So, conversations. One other thing that I did want to highlight, so advocacy does work. This again was not the work of my organization, but of people and organizations who do this disaster response work. The primary law that oversees federal disaster response is the Stafford Act. That is the law that created FEMA and that then governs everything that FEMA does. The Stafford Act had its most significant update that it's had in decades, and it was just passed this last October. And we call it DURA because there's no vowels in there. The Disaster Recovery and Reform Act, right? Okay. And it had a direct impact specifically on a lot of the work of the voluntary sector in really good ways that we're excited about. But it also had a very direct impact on the kinds of support that individuals can expect to receive when and if they are impacted by a disaster. Without going into all the details, it effectively doubled the amount of potential dollars that an individual household can receive from the government when they're impacted by disaster. That's huge. Used to be every year the Congress sets a level that's called the max grant level. You cannot receive FEMA dollars in excess of whatever that cap is that year. When Harvey hit, I think that cap was $32,000. They separated out the way those categories are calculated so that now you can receive whatever that max grant is, you can receive it over here, and you can receive it over here. Effectively, again, doubling the potential amount of support that families can receive. So all of that is to say, paying attention, talking to people, advocacy, it does work and it does change things.
And she asked earlier if she had used all of her time talking about immigration, but the fourth issue that we're going to address today that the planning committee asked us to talk about was health, and I'm not taking the time we went over on immigration out of your health time. So Bee's going to give us a quick update on health.
It will be quick, actually. Does everybody have this one-page handout that says Health Activist Leadership Network? Okay. The most important thing I can tell you about health is that on one page of this, on one side, it says join now, and then it's got a URL that you can join at. This Healthcare Activist Leadership Network is not Texas Impact's project. It's a project of a group called Cover Texas Now, which is the consumer and faith-based health advocacy coalition that Texas Impact helped start. We're one of the members of it. Other groups that you know, probably the Children's Defense Fund, the Center for Public Policy Priorities, and on, are all parts of this organization. Are you tired of hearing about how Texas is the most uninsured state in the country? Did you know that since we started keeping that statistic in the United States about which state was the most uninsured one, Texas has never not been? Never, ever, ever. Would you like it better if we would be only the 49th most? So.
Set the bar high there.
Right. So it's sometimes the reason that we don't make progress on public policy is because the issues are really complicated and there are competing goals and people of goodwill can disagree, and we need to talk to each other a lot more. And sometimes it takes a crisis like a hurricane for us to understand that we need to really all pull together and get on the same page. And sometimes it really is political. Sometimes it really is partisan issue. Sometimes it really is that every individual elected official knows that some policy approaches would result in better outcomes for their constituents than others. It's just politically challenging to try to do that. And when it is, do you suppose the best way to handle it is to get on Facebook and call them names? I think that is not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to come alongside them and say, I know it's hard and I am here to support you. And I want to do every single thing I can to help you make the decision that you know is the right decision for your constituents. That is what this group is about. If you sign up for it, you'll get some intensive training. you'll get specific opportunities to mobilize throughout the year, and a lot of it is gonna be around talking to members of the Texas legislature and candidates for the Texas legislature about what it will take for them to feel comfortable to do what they know is the right thing to do, which is not to leave millions of Texans uninsured. So that's my pitch, is you don't need to talk to your member of Congress about healthcare right now. Your healthcare problem isn't really at Congress, it's here in Texas, and this is the thing to help you take action on that.
All right, well, thank you all so much. We're gonna break in just a second. We're gonna head downstairs to the fellowship hall, and Diane is, do it. Yeah, Diane will help us get there. Before we head downstairs, a couple of, again, reminder, sports. Emma is in the back, and hey, this is Emma's first day back at Texas Impact, so we're pretty excited. She left for a while, but came back and started out with this. So everybody go say, hey, Emma, give her some money. Also, along those lines, Noah has been our young adult volunteer for the last year. Helping weekly witness, and this is his last week or two. So if you've enjoyed weekly witness over the course of the last year, come tell Noah thanks on the way down. There are handouts in the back. We're going to meet downstairs in about 10 minutes for the next conversation, which will involve how to do an effective legislative visit. But one more time, big thanks for this.